Has David Cameron lost control of the energy crisis? Probably very much so. Well, should we be surprised by this? Well, no, because human rule has failed. Of that, there is no doubt. A major reason for that failure is that humans lack the wisdom to rule successfully. The failure of man's rule is especially evident today when so many rulers have shown themselves to be lovers of themselves, lovers of money, self-assuming, haughty, disloyal, not open to any agreement, slanderers without self-control, fierce without love of goodness, betrayers and puffed up with pride. And that comes from 2 Timothy chapter 3 verses 2 to 4. Long ago, our first parents rejected God's way of ruling, and in doing so, they may have thought that they were choosing independence. But in reality, though, they were submitting to Satan's way of ruling. 6 millenniums of human mismanagement, powerfully influenced by the ruler of this world, Satan, have brought us to the current low point in human history. Why can we say that? Well, in John chapter 12 verse 31 we read, "Now there is a judging of this world, now the ruler of this world will be cast out." Commenting on the state of mankind today, the Oxford History of the 20th Century states that it is useless looking for a perfect world. It explains, not only can it not be found, but the attempt to create it leads to disaster, totalitarianism, and war at its worst. What a frank admission that human rule is a failure. So how tragic then that our first parents rejected the only kind of rule that does work, ruled by God. Of course, we do not know precisely how Jehovah would have structured his way of governing the earth if Adam and Eve had remained faithful to him. However, we can be certain that divine rulership accepted by all mankind would have been marked by love and impartiality. In view of God's matchless wisdom, we can also be sure that if mankind had remained under Jehovah's rule, all the mistakes made by proponents of human rule would have been avoided. God rule, theocracy, would have been successful in satisfying the desire of every living thing. Psalm 145 verse 16. So in short then, it would have been a perfect rulership. How tragic that humans have rejected it. Still, it is good to remember that even though Jehovah permitted humans to exercise self-rule, he at no time relinquished his right to rule over his creatures. Even the powerful king of Babylon was forced to realize that ultimately the Most High is ruler in the kingdom of mankind. Daniel 4:17. So in the long run, God's kingdom will cause his will to be done. And it's something that we pray for, or have been taught to pray for, in Matthew 6:10. Let your kingdom come, let your will take place, as in heaven also upon earth. So true in the short term, Jehovah has allowed Satan to act as the God of his system of things in order to provide a convincing answer to the issues that were raised by that opposer. Nevertheless, Satan has never been able to go beyond what Jehovah permits. And there have always been some individuals who choose to subject themselves to God, even though they were living in a world ruled by God's great adversary. From time to time, of Abel up to the time of the patriarchs, a number of faithful individuals worshipped Jehovah and obeyed his commands. In Moses' day, Jehovah entered into a covenant with the offspring of the patriarch Jacob, and these became the nation of Israel. In 1513 BCE, the Israelites committed themselves and their descendants to accept Jehovah as ruler, saying, "All that Jehovah has spoken, we are willing to do." Exodus 19 verse 8. So Jehovah had a purpose in choosing the Israelites to be his people. Deuteronomy 7 verses 7 and 8 reads, "It was not because of your being the most populous of all the peoples that Jehovah showed affection for you, so that he chose you, for you were the least of all the peoples, but it was because of Jehovah's loving you, and because of his keeping the sworn statement that he had sworn to your forefathers, that Jehovah brought you out with a strong hand, that he might redeem you from a house of slaves and from the hand of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. So this choice involved more than just the welfare of the Israelites. God's name and sovereignty were also involved, and they were of greater significance. Israel was to serve as a witness to the fact that Jehovah is the only true God. Hence, Jehovah said to that nation, "You are a holy people to Jehovah your God, and Jehovah has chosen you to become his people, a special property out of all the peoples who are on the surface of the ground." Deuteronomy 14, verse 2. So God's way of governing the Israelites took into account that they were imperfect. At the same time, his laws were perfect and reflected the qualities of their giver. Jehovah's commandments given through Moses clearly highlighted God's holiness, his love of justice, his willingness to forgive, and his patience. Later in the day of Joshua and his generation, the nation obeyed Jehovah's commandments and enjoyed peace and spiritual blessings. But that period of Israel's history demonstrated the success of Jehovah's way of ruling. Over time, though, the Israelites frequently turned away from God's rule and suffered the loss of his protection. Eventually, though, through the prophet Samuel, Israel demanded a visible human king. Now, Jehovah told Samuel to grant their request. However, Jehovah added, "It is not you whom they have rejected, but it is I whom they have rejected from being king over them." 1 Samuel 8:7. So although Jehovah permitted Israel to have a visible king, he warned them that rule by a human king would come at a price. Now, history demonstrated the truth of Jehovah's warning. Being ruled by a human king led to serious problems for Israel, especially when that king proved unfaithful. So with that example of Israel in mind, it is not surprising that throughout the ages, including today, government in the hands of humans who do not know Jehovah has failed to bring permanent good results. And haven't we seen that just recently? So true, some politicians invoke God's blessing on their efforts to achieve peace and security, but how can God bless those who do not submit to his way of ruling? The nation of Israel proved unwilling to serve Jehovah faithfully. Eventually they rejected God's appointed Messiah, and Jehovah rejected them and purposed to replace them with a group of people who formed a new nation. As a consequence, the year 33 CE saw the birth of a Christian congregation of anointed worshippers of Jehovah. Now that congregation was in effect a new nation under Jehovah's governing authority. Now Paul spoke of it as the Israel of God, Galatians 6:16. So between the original nation of Israel and the new Israel of God, there were both differences and similarities. Now, unlike ancient Israel, the Christian congregation has no human king, and it has no need for offering animal sacrifices in behalf of sinners. So one similarity between the nation of Israel and the Christian congregation is that the arrangement of aldermen or elders. Such Christian elders do not rule over the flock, rather they shepherd the congregation and unstintingly take the lead in Christian activities. They deal lovingly with each individual in the congregation according to honour and dignity to all. By meditating on God's dealings with Israel, members of the Israel of God and their other sheep, companions, develop greater appreciation for Jehovah and his way of governing. Now, for example, history shows that the human rulers of Israel greatly influenced their subjects, either for good or for bad. That fact impresses upon those taking the lead among Christians that, although they are not rulers like those ancient kings, they must always set a good example of faith. So Christians today proclaim to the world that human rule over mankind is nearing its end. And in 1914, Jehovah established his kingdom in the heavens under his appointed King Jesus Christ. And at that time he granted Jesus authority to go forth, conquering and to complete his conquest. Revelation 6:2. The newly enthroned king was told, "Go subduing in the midst of your enemies." Psalm 110 verse 2. Sadly, the nations have consistently refused to submit to Jehovah's rule. They have continued to act as if there was no Jehovah. Psalm 14 verse 1. A few anointed members of Israel of God still remain, and as Jesus' brothers they continue to act as ambassadors substituting for Christ. 2 Corinthians 5:20. They have been appointed as a faithful and discreet slave class to care for and provide spiritual food for anointed ones and a growing crowd of Christians who now include millions having the hope of living on earth forever. Matthew 24 verses 45 to 47 read, "Who really is the faithful and discreet slave whom his master appointed over his domestics to give them their food at the proper time? Happy is that slave if his master on arriving finds him doing so. Truly I say to you, he will appoint him over all his belongings." Jehovah's blessing on that arrangement is evident in the spiritual prosperity enjoyed by true worshippers today. Now each of us would do well to ask himself, do I fully recognise the responsibilities that I should shoulder within a Christian congregation? Am I properly supporting Jehovah's way of governing? Am I proud to be a subject of Jehovah's ruling kingdom? Am I determined to continue telling others about God's kingdom to the extent that I reasonably can? As a group, we willingly submit ourselves to the direction given by the governing body and cooperate with the appointed elders in the congregations, and in such ways we demonstrate our acceptance of God's way of ruling. So willing submission results in a worldwide unity that is unique in this divided world. It also produces peace and righteousness and brings glory to Jehovah, demonstrating that his way of ruling is by far the best. So when we see all the problems in the world today, isn't much of that due to the human rulership that we're under? Well, that human rulership is going to come to an end. Let's have a look at Daniel's chapter 2 verse 44. Now that tells us, "And in the days of those kings," or the governments that we see now, "the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be brought to ruin, and the kingdom itself will not be passed to any other people. It will crush and put an end to all these kingdoms, and it itself will stand to times indefinite." So we see there that all the human governments are soon going to be destroyed, and that will be replaced by God's government, which will stand for times indefinite. And that government will bring lasting joy for all of us. If you would like a free home Bible study at a time and place to suit you, please navigate your browser to jw.org and follow the links online. Thank you for listening.